Okay, good. Shani Dowell, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
You are in Nashville today?
Nashville, Tennessee. Yeah.
What is happening in the lovely city of Nashville?
um, uh, these times, the quarantine time is not the best. As you know, kind of being from Nashville, Nashville's all about festivals, music, large gatherings of lots of people and food together. So unfortunately, it's not the best time for our city because people do still do that, but you don't get to enjoy that they're doing that because they shouldn't be doing that.
That was actually my next question. Luckily not my friends on social media, but just like news broadcasts and things around like Broadway and some of the stuff felt like they weren't taking it perhaps as seriously as some might think they should. Is it getting better or is it still kind of wild?
No, they reopened, so it's back to it. East Nashville, I think they take things more seriously.
Shout out to East Nashville, one
yeah.
time for a few years.
So it's better, but again, it's kind of sad because East Nashville is also a place where it's fun to like gather together.
Sure.
So, but no, the Broadway is doing Broadway.
Well, hopefully, I don't even know what to say.
But I do think the rates are going down. I think we seem to be headed in a positive direction. So hopefully we can stay on that path long enough to open schools back up. I kind of joke. I do feel like we're a little bit like in a marathon and like right before the last 2 miles, we're like, let's go have a beer because they keep reopening the bars right before like we get the cases low enough to be able to open schools. So, yeah.
Probably a good metaphor for that. It's probably okay. Nonetheless, thank you for joining the Square Pizza Pod. Excited to have you. Hopefully, as you know, I think we're going to start hopefully with some fun, maybe interesting facts to kick off the podcast today.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe one a few years back, and then another fact that's maybe more current. But there's a rumor going around that you once attended a Jay-Z house party in 1997, which might be the best interesting fact, if true, we've had so far. So please confirm it's true or deny it, and then tell us more.
It could, sometimes age, having kind of been around for a long time, there's actually a couple of fun facts connected to this story.
I was around in 97, but I wasn't at the Jay-Z house party.
So I was in 1997. I was a rising senior in college. I went to Howard University undergrad, and I was working at an internship at Goldman Sachs. So my best friend from college and we both lived in New York. We lived in Park Slope before. I mean, it was kind of on its way to being super expensive, but it was before. And fun fact that we learned after the fact, so we lived above a Black bookstore called Nkiru Books, and we learned after the fact that bookstore was owned by Mos Def. So we didn't know that at the time. Wow. So back in 1997, we were basically subletting from a model who was like traveling around for the summer. So during that time though, we would just kind of like pop around as, we were kind of a bunch of college students. We had some other friends and we would pop around and somebody learned about a house party. And this, I think Jay-Z probably had one song out, but he had at his apartment in Brooklyn, he was having it. And to be fair, it was like a lot of people because it was out in kind of like the garden. But yeah, I was close enough to see Jay-Z and I saw him and got to be at a party at Jay-Z's house. So it was just in the middle of the summer in 1997 in New York, and he was having a house party and we came.
Now he's an early investor in Possip.
What's that? No. No, but we were so connected. I mean, the church that I used to go to in Houston, I'm originally from Houston. The church that I used to go to, Beyonce actually went there also. We didn't overlap at all, but Beyonce went there. She's invested a lot of money and they have a large homeless ministry. And so, sometimes some of the videos she shoots, her parents kind of lived where it close to mine. So I'm just a couple of degrees removed. So it's kind of guys like, how many degrees are they from Oprah? It's like that where you're like, I'm so close.
And
yet so far.
No, I think you got to own it. I think you got to say you and Jay-Z are best friends. I think you got to talk about how you grew up together. I think you should own it.
I should go for it.
Okay, so then skipping a few years beyond 1997, also a rumor going around that you're the first Black woman to ever raise $1 million. I think in Tennessee, or just like an ed tech focused firm in Tennessee. Is that also true? Which is awesome.
Yeah, I've been in Tennessee. And, I've always had like mixed feelings about the extent to which we celebrate that or even acknowledge it. I mean, but I've actually made peace with the fact that it is something that's important to celebrate and talk about. And part of what led me to kind of feel a little more, you can understand like the reasons why, of course, is like, it's unfortunately, it shouldn't be like, we shouldn't, it shouldn't be so slow. I've kind of joked that you could probably sit on a board and have more white men who've raised $1 million than kind of the number of Black women in Tennessee. So,
Sure.
so that's on the one hand, but an article came out in our local paper, the Tennessean, and it got picked up by USA Today, and so it was on Facebook. And then I saw people who I went to high school with, some of whom I knew, some of whom I didn't, who were celebrating that fact. And so it just reminded me that it's not really about us; it's really about other people and giving other people the motivation and the inspiration to know what's possible. Yep. And maybe $1 million isn't like especially kind of compared to how hundreds of millions of dollars that others raise. It's not as significant, but it's still super important for folks to see what's possible so that they can start to dream bigger for themselves and kind of see what's more possible for them.
No, I mean, yeah, I think that's right and super well put. I mean, surely probably 100% should have happened by now, but good that you are the first and hopefully opening the gates for more, but then also for the 12-year-old Black girl in Nashville or Memphis who sees that, who knows it's possible and knows and sees you as an inspiration that can also do that. So I think that's certainly something to be celebrated, if nothing else. Yeah,
and for so many entrepreneurs who are still on their journey, and I look to other people as role models for me of what's possible, and so for them, for kind of another generation of folks to see what's possible, also is super important. And interestingly, I was just sharing. We actually, I'll share that another time.
Okay, all right. Let's kind of keep going. I think you raised it for Possip, and now like I've been running this incredible organization that we've used before and we love with some of the schools that we support, but also because it's so focused on families and family empowerment. So just tell the people like what it is, what it's doing, and kind of the greatness behind the work.
Yeah, at its heart, Possip is really trying to do two things. One is help make decision makers' jobs easier. So school leaders, district leaders, they have to make impossible decisions. But part of what's hard about their decisions is they're trying to make it without the voices of the people who are affected most by their decisions. And so that's the second part of what we're trying to do, is make it really easy for parents and families and also staff members to share their voice, both the praise, what's going well, and then also the feedback or the needs. And so the way we do that is through our platform that sends out routine text message prompts to families or staff asking, we call it a sentiment question. And we've had to change it a little bit based on kind of, folks aren't even in physical school now. But so it's a combination of like, are you happy, or is the school meeting your child's needs? Or that's on one hand, and then follow up. And we really leave it open-ended. And part of that, leaving the kind of follow-up questions more open-ended is just it's a personal theory that I've had that I get more convicted about as we go on, which is surveys play an important role. Annual surveys play an important role. And yet how we design surveys are so closed-ended. And as we think about kind of just having a more equitable and open process, so much of what people want to share may not be included in the 15 questions that we think to ask about. And so we keep it really open-ended so that on the back end, we can kind of organize and provide trends and themes back to the leaders so that they can have better decision-making. So again, it's about helping leaders make better decisions and helping families and staff be more empowered, to your point, and feel like they have agency in the way that schools and districts educate their child.
Yep. Yeah, I think what from afar, why we selfishly love it, but probably from what we've seen with the schools that have used it as well, is that it, one, gives data and insights back, to your point, to the decision makers on the school and the teachers and the principals and the school leaders, but then also the decision makers at home too, around families, and kind of creating that early connection point. So it's not, October, November, December, when student A is struggling in school or like been late to school, and there's no relationship built between both those parties at that point. So often, relationship perhaps is on the wrong foot, but when you start and create that bridge early, both parties that are so instrumental into a child's life are already connected and working together.
Yeah, and it really, it's just like the power of questions it forces you as a leader to think about like, okay, what do I want parents to be saying about my school, my district? What are the positive things I want them to be saying? What are the areas that I know they should expect that we're doing right, and so they can share feedback? And then on the parent side, like, what are things that I need to be asking my student about? Like, what do I want to hear about so that I can report back? And so I think, so much of the family engagement research shows that a large part of the power of family engagement is actually what happens outside of the school day. So the extent to which you're engaged in what they're learning academically, or you know what's happening. And we still have a long way to go in education in terms of, one, just providing families the information so that they can be engaged, but then two, having a feedback loop so we can hear back. And, now is the perfect time where we're able to see on display why it's so important. I think one of the things, I think kind of the school closures taught us two things. One is that teachers are irreplaceable. And then two is that parents are irreplaceable. I think, sometimes there's this narrative in education, like I'm going to extract a child from the home, educate them, pour knowledge into them, and then send them back. And I think you can see like, no, you cannot remove families from the equation. So it's been really, I think, an important time for us to learn that lesson.
Yeah. Can you share more around like kind of size and reach of what you guys had maybe before this school year and then going into now with COVID, if it's increased, decreased, or anything else?
Yeah, it's increased pretty significantly.
I imagine so.
Yeah, about so as we were growing before COVID, and how I described some of our growth before is I think a lot of our initial original partners were really people who were just like kind of mission aligned, like they were wanting to hear from families and their staff just because it was the right thing to do. So they just had kind of like a mission orientation around the importance of family voice. And I think that's still the case. Of course, like all of our customers who've come on since share that. I just think the level of urgency has increased where it's not just like the right thing to do, but it's a need. Like it is, you need to know, like, do families have the technology? Like districts have kind of gone through lots of work to get technology into hands of students. But we know, like, even with what they're having to do to kind of manage, tens of thousands of devices in the hands of families is pretty monumental. And so they need a way for families to share back about like, hey, how is this technology working or not working? You kind of create these like ideas about how curriculum should work or how synchronous and asynchronous learning should work. And you don't really, as teachers, you're a former teacher also, so much of how we kind of get our information is by what we're seeing right in front of us. And that's the same for building leaders. You're so used to making decisions based on what's right in front of you every day. And you don't really have that. I mean, you have it in a little,
Yeah, no, very true.
2x2-inch box, but like, so you really need to be able to hear from families. And also it's only, a lot of schools are only able to deliver, between 2 and 4 hours of live teaching. And really probably the research would say like 2 to 3 hours is probably the ideal of like live teaching. So that still means there's a lot of learning that's having to happen outside of, Teams time or Zoom time or whatever, kind of technology you're using.
Yep.
And so anyway, so that's all to say we have seen quite a bit of growth, and I think it's really important. And transparently, some of our team members, like, we were already passionate before, but we get just so passionate about the need to have routine ways to have that conversation and feedback loop going, especially during this time.
I mean, it's so well positioned, right? Even pre-COVID, but now given the virtual nature in which everybody's working, and to have this tool and to have it be accessible for schools is huge, number one. And I guess number two, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm imagining too, is like from my own experience teaching and working in schools, but also now supporting schools, that even if you have to have a tough conversation with families or deliver news or ask questions around virtual learning or in-person learning, it's much easier. Maybe there's much more grace extended to both ways when those relationships are already built, which your tool allows to do. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, for sure. I was just talking with a school leader about this also. Yeah, like first of all, like families are, at least at their intention, they have a lot of grace for what's happening. They, for the most part, of course you like have outliers, but for the most part, I'd say families are extending a ton of grace for just the challenge that we're in. And part of what I was sharing though is sometimes I was, I recently was talking to a family who had withdrawn their student from the school. And part of what I was sharing with this other school leader is sometimes families just need to know that they have a way to share, that things aren't going to permanently be in their way. And so often schools, there's not a way for parents to share. And so instead of saying like, I'm going to be able to share this feedback, they're going to hear that feedback, things can change, they just leave. And so we're seeing, a pretty large exodus. I mean, as a percent, even if it's like just 5 to 10%, we know our public schools are pretty fragile. And so 5 to 10%, disenrollment is non-trivial. And so, but I think sometimes that's because families don't really know the way to change what's not working for them. And so what we offer is, like you said, the relationships, the opportunity to build a relationship in a way that it doesn't have to be always high stakes. But then two, to like have a platform through which you can share so that your only option isn't to just leave, but it's to say, hey, we can actually stay in this. I know things aren't going to be perfect, but I can share some of our ideas or what we like to see change. You're going to be able to have a way to hear them and then respond. And so there's just I shared this on Twitter, like, we're all founders this year, like teachers,
Very true.
school
Yeah.
leaders, parents. So like, as this as an entrepreneur, you're constantly learning, changing,
Yep.
adjusting, adapting, taking feedback, and like all the ways that it comes in. Some of it's formalized, but some of it's not formal. It's just like what you learn from what you see. And so schools need that. It's just the difference between like potentially probably what we work with and what a school works with is they have to deal with such diverse and dispersed populations, particularly school districts. They're thinking about tens of thousands of students, hundreds of thousands sometimes, hundreds of languages. And so just like the levels of complexity that they have to try to like take in to make decisions is pretty significant.
One thing too, like bring schools and families on the same page or same team, if you will, right? Like sometimes, whether families have been disenfranchised from schools or just haven't had good experiences, sometimes they're schools and families and then children are kind of at ends with each other. And I think this brings them together around sharing what they want, what they need, and then vice versa, which I think in an ideal world, there's no reason why kind of schools and families should not be working together at the end of the day to begin with.
Yeah, it's neat. We've seen it actually with a couple of partners, and we've started to do staff surveys too during this time. And what we've seen a few times is actually sometimes you'll see families and staff sharing the same challenges. And I think what's neat about that is,
Guys, like, let's figure it out together.
yeah. And as humans, we're actually all part of a system. Like we all end up parts of systems. And so sometimes what I might be doing as what I think might be best. So a good example is, I think there were for some schools who really they knew that like for parents who had kids at home who were like 5 or 6, so that's super stressful and challenging. Yep. So sometimes some schools, in an effort to be really responsive to that, created more virtual learning time because, your thought would be like, oh, that's helpful. 5 hours of live teaching will help the parents because the parents will be able to kind of like not have their, but the reality is that's hard for teachers. And then I think we're all seeing that 5 and 6 year olds really struggle to be on Zoom, and that longer time is actually harder. So it's, from well-intentioned place. But then when you can bring the voices of the people together, you can hear like, oh, actually this isn't working as we thought it would work. And so let's rethink it. But otherwise you could think like, as a parent, you think, oh, well, the school's saying my child needs to be on here 5 or 6 hours. That must be the right thing to do. As a teacher, you could be thinking like, oh, well, parents probably want their kid to be occupied. So 5 or 6 hours is ideal. And no one ever gets to share the information and like, hey, actually this isn't working for either of us.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So I just think having more opportunities for people to actually share honestly and with kind of grace, then you can solve some of the problems before people just get frustrated and walk away.
Yeah, that's so important. I imagine like you've rolled a lot of the previous experiences you've had into Possip and like building a team. And so like for those that don't know, people need to go check out your LinkedIn profile because it's like the who's who of ed organizations and social impact work before this point. But would love to hear like from all those kind of experiences, but then also knowing like this podcast, but also our work is focused on ed equity. And we don't think that can happen without just real conversations around being anti-racist as an organization and as a country and as people we work for. So with all those things kind of at the center, we'd love to just hear like your experience in this space with the different professional careers you've had and how race and gender have played a part in your career at all.
Yeah. So it's interesting. One of the things that's not on my LinkedIn is my parents. So my parents, and I joke, is actually like after I started Posse, probably like a year later, it came to me. So my mom is a licensed counselor. So she spent most of her career doing marital counseling and also juvenile counseling. And she, for many of her years, she was working in the juvenile detention center, doing counseling there. So she's a counselor. My dad is actually, he has a company that does research and evaluation. So they'll do like evaluation of like Head Start or Job Corps programs. And so I kind of joke like Possip's a mashup of that. It's kind of like what's in the head and feel about it.
Well done.
Yeah. So I didn't even realize it, but it's like my dad's like a PhD. So his is like very research, and ours is, I feel like is like more about like kind of the ongoing relationship and routine. So it's not, but I do think that kind of is a big part of my experiences that didn't even come to me until later. But I do think part of what I learned from my mom and her work as a therapist, and I think that's kind of just is the importance of talking and sharing and feedback and honest, conversation. And that, there's a James Baldwin quote, something like, not everything that is, not everything that is seen can be fixed, but nothing can be fixed if it's not seen. I'm butchering it, but that's the idea. And I think that that's very much from kind of a counseling perspective, which is the importance of sharing things, getting things out in the open, having conversations. And then there's also an importance of like data, just like hardcore data, trends. What are we seeing year over year, time over time compared to others? And so I think those two things are really important. I think in terms of, a couple of the spaces where Possip came from in the lens of race and gender, so part of it came from my husband who leads schools, and it was really a dinner table conversation.
Shout out to Randy.
Yeah. We were having a dinner table conversation about a parent issue that had kind of grown. And so I was both like hearing his stress. So that's part of kind of like the two-way description of Possip I gave at the beginning is really that. So like I empathize with school leaders. I've worked with hundreds of school leaders over time. I know how hard that job is. I know how hard the teaching job is. I've recruited teachers. I know how hard recruiting and retaining teachers is. So he was sharing this stress because one, it's just stressful. Anytime someone's kind of like angry at you, it's just naturally a stressful thing. Two, this angry parent was like calling and stressing out the teachers. And so as he and I were in this back and forth, though, I was also empathizing with a parent because I'm the mother of 2 school-aged children. And so overall, I know that sometimes even when people deliver feedback in the not the greatest way, there might be some there. And so it's really that back and forth conversation he and I were having where, I was saying, well, and again, some of this is like kind of a therapist or counseling side. I was like, how can parents identify their issues before, like when they're just a pinch, like before they become like so big that they have to like yell at you. So we kind of realized like, actually there's not a prompt. A lot of times people need to be prompted to even know that they're bothered about something or so that's kind of the first part. And then I said, well, she's not sharing this feedback in the best way, but do you have any trend data to know if other parents feel this way? And so we went back and forth and realized that like, actually, no, there's not really a systemic way that information like that is gathered. And then the third thing he said is, well, this makes my teacher's job so hard. They work so hard and they only hear from parents when things are bad. Mm-hmm. So that really convicted me as a former teacher, as a parent who loves my kids' teachers, and realizing like, oh my goodness, are we as parents sometimes driving teachers out of the profession, like the people who we most need in there for our child and with this? And even if it's not me personally, if it's another parent who, so how do we create the space? I, as a parent, maybe can't stop another parent from yelling at a teacher, but I can share what's going well for me and my child, such that if something's not going well one day with one child, with one parent, that's not the only experience you've had hearing from parents. And so it was really kind of these 3 things that led me to think. And then I think that's where race and gender came in, which is I was like, what if we make it super easy for parents to share? And so make a text message. Like no one wants to download another app.
I hear that.
Make it in their language. And I think part of what I realized, I didn't think this was like a big idea or a big deal, but then I realized when I was even going out fundraising, sometimes I would talk to prospective investors and they say like, well, it's not like, does anyone not share what they're thinking? And so I think that's very much so a gendered and racial kind of privilege where someone's like, well, if I have something, I just share it with the school. It's like, it's a very entitled place where I had sat on mom car lines and mom's text chains where people are like sharing all this stuff back and forth with each other that never enters into the school because they don't necessarily even think the school wants to know. And I know as a person in education how desperately schools want to hear from families, but a lot of parents, or especially people who've been historically disenfranchised or disempowered, don't think that they're entitled to share their feedback. So I think that's been a huge part. And then when I was starting Possip and I looked at other communication companies, so first I was trying to see, is there anywhere that where, kind of it's the different directionality, so not from the school to or district to the parents, but from parents to the school. I found that there weren't others that I could see. And when I would look on the leadership teams, it would be like, not just like the top level, but I would have to go, sometimes I could never find a person on the website who wasn't an older white man. And so that just struck me as really odd because we know so much of the communication with schools really does involve women, and our public schools are predominantly now students of color. And so the fact that, that identity is not represented within kind of multiple levels of companies around communication seemed to me hugely problematic.
Wow.
I'm realizing I thought I was all charged up. So my battery might die.
more reason for us to, 60 seconds left, I think, to honor your battery. And I think the lunch your child brought you. So 30 seconds or less, what's one thing you would tell the audience to do to improve education by the end of the week?
Ooh, that's a good one. You know, I believe in money. So I feel like find a school you love and just send them money.
I'll send you
Do
the
the money
address. Yeah.
awesome things. Folks are under-resourced and can find a way to spend it.
Yeah, I think very practical. Love it. And a bit of a selfish one, but hopefully still fun. What does square pizza remind you of?
Actually, Jets Pizza, which
Yeah.
makes me think of Halloween. Jets is a pizza here. It actually also reminds me of Little Caesars. So when I was in high school, I was the president of Students and Prejudice, and we had a lock-in, and Little Caesars donated pizza for us. So I don't love the taste of Little Caesars, but I do appreciate that they did that, and I do love the taste of Jets. Jets is very tasty, and we order it for our annual Halloween party, which we won't be having this year, not in the same way at least.
So yeah, a quick connection. When I was in Nashville, I lived off Elliston Place. I think before it got bougier than what it is now, at least when I went back a few years ago. But our apartment was on top of the Jets, and I never went to Jets. But then if you ever open the door or the window, it was like wafting up. So I swear I gained 15 pounds that year because it was so close, and you couldn't go out without walking past it or smelling it. And it's good pizza.
It's pretty good. It's funny. We lived literally across the street from a Captain D's for 5 years, and like we could see the drive-through, and we never went. But one New Year's, we made a resolution that if we had not gone, we would go. So we did not go that whole year until December 31st. We finally went to Captain D's. So that's the one time I've been in Captain D's, but it was pretty fun. We could smell it similarly. We could smell it and hear the drive-through all the time.
You're allowed to have cheat meals.
Yeah.
Shani Dowell, thank you so much. We will link all the show notes where people can find you and Possip and make sure to get it in their communities. And
you're a natural.
We appreciate you taking time. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay.